We're seeing it sadly in some sectors of the business world, and I think, there's a lack of emotional intelligence. And I was at a really interesting last year, definitely not an event this year, last year, talking to a couple of startups. And one of these guys said, we really need to have a new role in the C-suite, and it should be a chief trust officer. And I sort of stood back and went, what? Chief trust officer? And he said, our generation, and he meant the much younger leaders in business, don't know trust.
Welcome to the Kind Boss podcast, brought to you by Outsourcing Angel, an Australian-based social enterprise that specializes in helping business owners free up their time and reduce staffing costs, while helping to create employment opportunities for people in developing countries. Visit outsourcingangel.com today. Now, let me welcome your host, Linh Podetti.
Hello, kind listeners. I'm your host, Linh Podetti. Today, we'll be speaking to a kind boss, Melissa Donnelly, Director at Affinity Communications and Board Member of the Domestic Violence Prevention Centre. With 30 years experience, Melissa serves companies and not-for-profits by translating their big issues and concepts into easily digested, bite-sized pieces for greater results. Listen on as she shares how leaders can grow their business by rediscovering their purpose and creating happier workplaces through impactful communications with staff and customers. Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Kind Boss podcast. And today I have Melissa Donnelly. Welcome.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. And yeah, I really wanted to have a chat with you because you've got like 3 decades of working in marketing and communication. And I just thought I really want to learn from you. How has marketing changed 30 years ago? Where is it now? And what even the term communication mean? Because to be honest, I'm in marketing, but I don't really use that term much. And I think, this is something I'm very interested to learn. So let's start with, what was marketing or communication like 30 years ago and to now?
That sounds like we should be talking about before electricity existed. So 30 years, when you say it like that, scary. So I started my career in public relations, which at that point was a fairly traditional, what you'd call a push communication out to the market. So you'd write a media release, do an invite to an event, and in the bad old days, we actually used to use telex machines, frighteningly enough. But yes, then we moved to fax and then email. But it was mass comms, wasn't personalised, and then you'd hustle. You'd hit the phones and call your journos and hustle. Journos didn't like you, hard work, and you'd get results, but it was a hard slog. So I realised probably 10 or 15 years into that game that so much of that was going to get transactional. It was actually getting very transactional. And it was getting productized to the point that really it didn't need a person involved. Again, we had automation coming in through mass email. So I shifted more into the strategic marketing and communication side of things, where we could really talk about how businesses were engaging with their staff and engaging with their customers or clients. So really reaching out to the broader marketplace. So public relations then becomes part of your mix, but not all of your mix. So, and I guess that sort of answers the question around communications, what is it? And you're not alone. I don't think one person I know, including my husband, can explain what I do for a living. So I see communications as the glue between the idea and the action that you're seeking. So if you're seeking to persuade someone to your point of view, which is what any company is doing when you think about it, then you're using communication to persuade that person or another company around to your way of thinking. So there's a massive tools that we use as part of that. And obviously marketing's critical to it, but then you've got other methods that you would be using. So you'd be looking at what is so great now, which is content, but content that's not just got a sort of marketing outcome to it. So you've got content that influences, content that persuades, content that provides value. So communications is really that very broad glue that certainly in the world that I work in, we're looking at it to connect the strategy and vision of a business, so that grand idea, to something quite actionable that people can do something with.
Yeah, because you work with a lot of more corporate bigger clients, don't you? And that's why they have to learn how to, or not learn, but get the communication right even with internally, not just externally.
Yeah, so my business is geared very much at what I call the mid-market companies. So I used to work in large enterprise. And in fact, the reason I set up Affinity Communications was I realized we were doing some amazing work, but the turnaround times are a lot slower in large enterprise. You don't have the agility. So I stumbled across this amazing sector called the mid-markets back about 10 or 11 years ago. They existed before that. I just found them. So yeah, and they're a really interesting sector. In Australia, for instance, they represent only 2% of all registered companies in Australia, but they represent 25% of Australia's annual revenue. So at the minute they generate, actually these figures are a couple of years old, but around $645 billion worth of revenue.
When you say not registered, what does that not registered mean?
So these are registered companies. So when you go and list a company in Australia, like you register an Australian business number or Australian company number, that's called the company registrations.
Yep.
And of all of the businesses registered in Australia, don't have the figure off the top of my head, but there are thousands. The mid-markets are only 2% of all of them. So, and the mid-markets, the definition that I use that's fairly commonly used is they represent about $10 to $250 million worth of revenue. So that's what each of those companies earn. So I work with companies slightly smaller than that, but they're growing or aspiring towards that size of business. So for them, they've got the agility of small business. They've got that entrepreneurialism of small business. They're not hamstrung by a lot of the hierarchy and traditional thinking of large enterprise, but their business owners are still very connected to the business. So that's the exciting bit. So again, if you think back and go, well, communications is connecting the grand idea to the action, then those business owners, whilst they're always struggling to get their heads out of running day to day to thinking about their business, communications is really important to that size of organisation. So with innovation and growth, you can't do that unless you're gluing it together with something, and that in my
world. So what would be a typical problem that people come to you for? Like, you know, is it that because they're wanting to grow their revenue to a certain amount and wanting that kind of marketing strategy, or what would be the typical case scenarios?
Can I swear? Just
the
conversation starts with my website shit.
Yeah.
What can you do about it? The phones stop ringing. So it's the problems that many business owners have. You know, their pipeline's lumpy. They're looking at themselves in the market, and there's no clear cut through for them. So they know they're cluttered. They know they're fragmented. They may not think about it at a brand level. They may not go, oh, my brand's very fragmented in the market, but they know they're not getting the cut through. And usually it'll come back to revenue, and that makes perfect sense. So they'll have a bugbear. What they generally then don't always like is I'll say, I'm sorry, your website's shit. That's the last thing we're going to talk about. So then we go back and start to understand what's the purpose, why are you in business, what are you here to achieve? And we work from there, and usually then the website will come in at the end of the game. So that's the bit they don't like chewing on.
And they kind of diagnose themselves as my website is the problem, but they don't realize that there's more to it. And do you think that also having a business size like that, you've been in business for so long, you kind of get complacent, or you don't really know where else to go, or you're kind of feeling stuck? Is that because they've just been in business for too long and stagnant kind of?
Yeah, look, sometimes maybe it's stagnancy. It's often in the mid-markets too. They're family-owned companies. So that's why they're so hard to find. You know, they're quite an opaque sector because often they may be third, fourth, fifth generation family-owned businesses. So they're doing things the way they've always done them. That's true. The other thing is if they've had rapid growth out of small, then business has happened almost in spite of itself. Their success has happened. Now they've got to sit down and think, we've hit that tipping point now. We've got to restructure. We've got to introduce systems and processes. We've got to have more rigor around the way we do things. We need specialists and expert support, and we can't necessarily find that in-house. So because they can't pay what necessarily large corporates would pay. So actually skills deficit is a big issue. So they're all the reasons then they'll turn and find something obvious, like my sales brochure looks terrible, I can't convert sales, or my website looks like shit. What they're actually saying is that I'm not representing my business the way it currently looks and to reflect the growth that we want to see and the change we want to see.
Yeah.
So typically they're in a state of change, and that's what's bothering the CEO. He just thinks, or she just thinks, it's a website or a brand.
Yeah.
Or an elevator pitch.
And yeah, with that kind of size business, is there much difficulty in making changes and having the rest of the company adapting to the change? Because I want to understand more around the communication to staff or internally. Because, you know, with my size business, it's a lot smaller, so we can actually kind of get things done, and there's no, we don't have to fuss too much around the communication. But that kind of size business, what would be those challenges for internally?
Yeah, well, those ones you're looking at anywhere from 10 staff up. So they're actually not all of them are massive, but you can be them looking beyond 100 staff. So that's what I actually love about these businesses, is that change is possible, and it's possible relatively quickly. So again, you're not hamstrung in that large cycle of a large enterprise, which can grind and take years to affect change or make an impact. So the great thing is, and again, if we go right back to the start of the process, which is ideally where my team loves to come in, is where we're actually doing insights work, is that's where we start the engagement and collaboration with the staff. So we bring them in to facilitated work sessions where we talk to them about what's your understanding of the company's strategy? What's your understanding of your organisational goals? What's your perception of this organisation in the marketplace? And we'll do the same with external stakeholders. And then we marry that together into a picture of the business the way it is now, and then a look forward as to the vision of that company in the next, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. So the process and journey for the staff starts really early in an ideal world. And then we grow on that. So at each stage in our strategic roadmap, we look for the milestones, and those milestones are always about what's the activation with the staff, what's the activation or engagement point with the staff. Because if you think about it, there's been several reports done, but most staff in a business actually don't know the plan of the business. So they don't know why they get out of bed every day and come to work. And that doesn't mean they're not doing a good job. They just don't really know. And it's easy for a business leader to go, oh, they don't get it. Well, have you told them? So, and do they understand what's in it for them? So if you convert that figure and say most of your staff now know why they get out of work, why they get out of bed every day, and then each of those staff members is communicating that purpose and energy and direction and focus to prospects and customers, bingo, all of a sudden your sales pipeline's looking a lot healthier, your engagement around your clients is looking a lot better, all your numbers go up. So that's why those milestones are really important throughout the process, because you can't just bring them in at the end and say, here's the plan, you've had no say in it, please buy into it, and could you communicate it effectively externally? Guaranteed failure.
Yeah. I mean, like for my business, because of our purpose and connection with charity and kind of like, working with developing country, it is a lot easier kind of when we're attracting clients or staff, they kind of wanting to follow that purpose. I guess what would your recommendation be for a business? Let's just say, they started the business because it makes money, right? Like as in it's what the family created so that they could make a living, and it's built up. And how would you motivate, or how would you be able to communicate something like that to give the people that you work with a purpose, something bigger than you're in this business to make money, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. And it's the one thing when we run strategy sessions and collaboration sessions, when we have the purpose conversation, the bit where people like to leave the room for any excuse is when I say your purpose is not about money. They usually want to leave the room screaming, or they go very pale. So I'll tell you a story. One of the clients, they're no longer a client, but we still have a great relationship that I work with. They're a fourth or fifth generation family-owned company in printing. They started as a print shop, and they started as a print shop in rural Queensland. And the reason they started as a print shop was because local businesses and people needed to get posters done and flyers done. So they'd been around since the colonial period in Australia. Wow. And then, again, various family members had seen opportunities for growth, and they'd gone from there. So when I was starting to work with them, they had that wonderful history, but also it didn't reflect where they were as a business now, because now they're doing basically any sort of hard copy or digital asset management and inventory management. That's what they did. So huge business and servicing huge clients, incredible growth story. The CEO has a brilliant vision for that company. But again, we had to sit down and go, well, what's your purpose, and is it still valid today like it was back in the late 1800s? And their purpose, even though again you think, oh, well, it was to make money to be a print shop, their purpose was about wanting it all. They wanted every single part of their client's business to do with their assets and inventory. So they would service clients to the nth degree to help those clients understand that everything that had a brand on it was an asset and could be managed better. So when you actually unpack it all, even though you could sit there and talk to the business owners who were still on the board, like previous generations were still on the board, it wasn't an easy conversation. But really, it was about they loved sport, we talked about the personal stuff for them, and out of the personal stuff and the history came a purpose. So then we re-engaged with the staff around that. So, and they've still got actually a print shop in regional Queensland that they still have an office in. So we looked at the history of that building, and we did a photo montage in that building that was an exhibit for the staff to say, do you understand the shoulders that you're standing on every day you come to work? So, so actually that one became an easy way to engage the staff because the story was just so compelling. And that's really, purpose in a way is just your story, right?
So it became a very sentimental reason for people to be there. They kind of feel like, oh, I'm connected to this history. And it's not just always a business needed to have, like, I guess, a social side and donating money to things. It's still finding the purpose that motivates people, that makes people feel the reason why I'm here. And
it isn't always easy. I'm talking to someone recently about accounting firms and particularly tax firms, and she said, oh, how hard is it to have a grander purpose when you're an accounting firm? And again, I said, well, that's where we've got to go back and have those personal conversations and find those stories that drive the owner of that business out of bed every day. And if the owner doesn't feel compelled to get out of business every day, or the partners don't, possibly there's a larger issue in the business. And there are times where we will be having that conversation and it'll be a point of, we're going to time out here, and you've actually got to go away and have another look at your vision and your strategy at an organisational level, because we've got a symptom here of a deeper problem. But even an accounting firm, even my small communications firm, I've got a very clear, I know why I set it up, and I would hope that all the network that works with me understand what our purpose is and behaves according to that when they're representing me and this company to their
I think it's so important, because then it makes you happier, you're more fulfilled going to work, and then as a byproduct you will grow your business, because it's kind of like, it's hard to grow your business if you just not happy.
Exactly. And I know from dealing with several members of your team it's very clear in dealing with your business. So what you start to get then is a similar set of character traits, you get some similar behaviours and everything. So then all of a sudden your brand is coming through without you having to tell me about it. I'm seeing it demonstrated. And that's where that really sinks. That's what makes it.
Want to make a difference in others' lives? Join us in providing food, medical supplies, and daily living necessities to tribal communities living in extreme poverty in the Philippines. For as little as $50, you can feed a whole village and have peace of mind that 100% of your donations goes directly to those in need. Be a part of our OA Love projects and visit outsourcingangel.com.
Well, in this next segment, it's called the high five. And this is where I'm going to ask you some fun personal question. It's a this or that. You only have to choose multiple choice, not too personal. And just elaborate on your choice so that we could get to know Melissa for a little bit. But after that, I want to ask you more questions around leadership, because I really think you've had 30 years of experience. You've probably come across so many leaders. I'm so intrigued with, what were they like before and what are they now? But we'll get to that later. So just choosing the choice this or that. And my first question is, fine dining in a hotel or casual dining by the river?
Can I say fine dining by the river?
That's why it's a hard choice.
I'm the sort of person who glamps. I don't go camping and sit on manky chairs that are falling down and eat grilled sausages. So yeah, fine dining by the river.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Number 2. So this, if you were receiving a gift, 6 months of flowers or a hairdryer, sorry.
Flowers. I have a hairdresser.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of flowers. I love flowers. And, now I'm getting into artificial flowers because the flowers keep dying. So I've been getting even real looking flowers and just, and they're just pretty and they just sit there. But I do love the smell of the new flowers though.
Yeah, no, you're right. No, I love flowers. As I constantly remind my husband, I love flowers.
Me too. I hint all the time too. I'm like, just get me a $10 bunch. It doesn't matter, right? Just any flower. All right, number 3, Facebook or Instagram?
Facebook. If I'm going to do either, I'm really rubbish. I'm a voyeur on both.
You're good on LinkedIn, but yeah. So
LinkedIn's my space. I like playing LinkedIn.
Cool. Number 4, hiking on the mountain or bushwalking?
Oh God, neither. Why walk and drive or fly? I don't walk. I'm not built for walking.
I would say bushwalking since you don't have to hike up the mountains, huh?
Yeah, although then I'd go the view at the top of the mountain's hopefully worthwhile, or I would whinge like a stuck, you know what. So I guess if I had to do one or the other, it would be the hiking. Sure.
Oh, okay. You're already looking really tired and like before you even start hiking.
Nah, I don't believe in walking if you can drive and fly. Not good for carbon emissions. Sorry, environment.
All right. Finally, empathy or compassion?
Empathy. That's where Affinity Communications came out of. The name is about us understanding a connection, and I think you can only do that through empathy. So
there you go. Love it. I definitely got to know Melissa more. the Princess Melissa. All right. So back to business. When it comes to leadership, like I would imagine the last 30 years, people would have been so different, right? They would have been very professional and not mixed kind of personal with business. And I'm not just this is just my imagination, by the way, that people think that they have to be very like a boss, and then they're not really showing the human side, and now it's a lot more humanized. Is that the case? Is there any other things that you've noticed over the years?
Yeah, we were only talking about this actually the other day. What were we doing? Oh, we were watching an episode of Billions actually on Stan. I'm a massive fan of this show, Billions. And actually there's a moment in it where someone of a certain generation, possibly mine, is speaking to a bunch of students and talks at them and is very autocratic. And they arc up. And my husband and I were both saying, haven't things changed? And the command and control style that certainly in my era you grew up with, right? The boss told you what to do, you did it. You may have asked questions, very much discouraged. If you did, it was seen to be offensive if you asked questions. So that's really the environment that we grew up in, and certainly again in my era, it was very pale, stale and male in terms of leadership and bosses, even in public relations, which was a very female-centric industry. The big boys were big boys, so not big girls. In the main, there were some outstanding exceptions to that rule that I had the pleasure to work with and for, but few and far between. So yeah, things have changed, and there's a presentation that I give often to uni students and master's grads about #lead out loud, and it's about what I see now though of a very sad state where I think the bully boy leader has emerged, and it's happened globally. You've only got to look at our friend Donald Trump as a startling example of it. And we've had, I think, prime ministers and political leaders, certainly here in Australia, who are the same. And their idea is just push through. No collaboration, no inclusion, no equitable conversation, just push through, and you're talking at people. So it's almost like this cycle has come back to this very regressive form of leadership.
But from your example, is it still because it's politics or in the business world?
I think we're seeing it sadly in some sectors of the business world, and I think, there's a lack of emotional intelligence. And I was at a really interesting event last year, definitely not an event this year, last year, talking to a couple of startups, and one of these guys said to me, we really need to have a new role in the C-suite, and it should be a chief trust officer. And I sort of stood back and went, what? Chief trust officer? And he said, our generation, and he meant the much younger leaders in business, don't know trust. And he's right. If you think about going back into the global financial crisis, which a lot of these guys grew up through or started at the back of, every pillar of society that we used to trust, the church, politics, the banks, they crumbled. You know, the banks definitely crumbled. The finance sector crumbled. So the things that we just grew up trusting fell apart, right?
That's
so
true.
They haven't grown up in an era of trust. And then you've got, again, the emergence of these fringe dwelling leaders who've just found a voice and actually had it amplified, sadly, through social media in a lot of instances, and they've drowned out everybody else. So I worry about that bleeding into business, and I think it was a really interesting point about having a CTO at a business who's not a chief technology officer, but a trust officer, you know. So it's not all bad, and I think there are some incredible leaders operating now. I have a great privilege of working with several, and I have seen them stand up over the last few months in a way that is just incredibly admirable. I mean, just mind-blowing stuff. So it's been a real pleasure to work with them during this period. But I have seen others who, again, to me, are more that bully boy push-through leader. There's no substance, and you bring people with you if you are just pushing through. So that lack of engagement is coming back to haunt them, and it's coming back to haunt them in their client base. It's coming back to haunt them in their staff base. And I think when the world starts recruiting again, they're going to struggle.
So you kind of like win in the short term, but you're not going to win in the long term if you're not a good leader.
No. And again, it's the things of leadership that, you know, and I know a couple of the people we both connect with on LinkedIn talk about kindness and how, you know, how does kindness factor into leadership? When I was a young person in business, kindness was weakness. And you know, it just wasn't. The alpha male did not demonstrate kindness, you know. So it's like vulnerability that's emerged probably in the last 10 or 15 years as something. I still think it's a brave thing to admit to and embrace, but it's there. It's part of the leadership makeup now. And kindness to me is not a soft, sweet thing. Like if you're being kind to your staff, you're making tough business decisions because you want to keep them. So businesses, my brother works for one, businesses that have taken pay cuts and day cuts from the top down to keep their junior staff in jobs now. That's an immense kindness, but that's really hard. That's not about being soft and sweet and sugary. You're making tough calls that not everyone's going to like. But it's kind, if you like.
I love that example. Well, I was actually going to ask you the next question, which is, what does a kind boss mean to you? Because obviously this is a kind boss podcast, and I like to hear everyone's different take on what does a kind boss mean?
Yeah. Again, that idea of service. I'm really big on leadership being about service. You know, and from Jesus on through, the great leaders have served their people, and they've served the wider community. So, and again, that's not always going to mean you're serving them in the way they think they need or want, but you're going to serve them in the best way that you can see. And that's your job, is to try and look forward and peer over the horizon and see the good and the bad and the difference that's coming, and help everybody move forward to that. So to me, again, the greatest kindness you can show is to serve something so small as, you know, picking up a bag that somebody's dropped, to, again, reshaping your entire organisation to get it through a period like COVID. So
that is so beautiful. Thank you for that. So how do people connect with you?
Best place to connect with me is on LinkedIn. As you know, I am there every day, day in, day out. So LinkedIn's great. Otherwise, through my website, you can contact me.
It's at affirmity.com.au?
Affinity.
Affinity.
.com, not .au. We have global aspirations here. Affinitycoms.
.com. Okay, cool. My last question for you is, what do you want the world to remember Melissa for?
Actually, being a chameleon, we were talking about haircuts before. Yeah. Everyone will be laughing about me and my different haircuts. So so they can remember a chameleon. So again, I was adapting when they needed it, and I was I was whatever they needed to be at the time and place. And I'd be happy with that. So I'm known to be a chameleon. And
Okay, I actually don't know what the chameleon word means because
look them up. They're amazing creatures. Chameleons change color according to their environment. So if a chameleon, they're like a lizard. If they walk onto like this red jacket, they would turn red, and you wouldn't be able to see the difference between the jacket and the chameleon. So again, that's sort of where Affinity came out of, is that idea of we'll shape ourselves to suit the problem at the time, and help clients do the same. So but it is a running joke that people often don't recognise me because I change sunglasses, hairdo.
You know, to work with someone that's smart and experienced in marketing communication, but is fun, that is, you know, adaptive to the current environment and your organisation, then Melissa is the person you go to, right?
You're a gem. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being on my show, and I'll see you again soon.
Thank you for joining our podcast today. We hope this interview has inspired and humbled you to be a kind boss. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what you think about our show. If you have any questions, please visit outsourcingangel.com. Until then, stay kind and spread love.